creative and
Okay, let's see. Here's something from Electra. Okay. Voice to text. Electra's going to transcribe. Okay. I have 12 o'clock. Do you think we should get started?
yes, ma'am.
All right. Let's do it.
Okay. I think I'll start and introduce our facilitator and myself. So, welcome to the new Quadrivium of the world's best practices in virtual world's best practices in education. I'm doing this at the same time. There we go. Our topic is surviving the assessment jungle, meaningful assessment in virtual environments. Our facilitator for this quadrivium is Galen Larn, also known as Donna Kaiser. Donna is an educator, storyteller, virtual and real life builder, and is an assessment scoring director for Pearson Educational Services. She is also a part-time executive director for the Ageless Mind Project, the parent organization for whole brain health on Inspiration Island and here at VWBPE. I am Linda Sorrow, also known as Peggy Daniels Lee in real life. I call myself an evangelist for the use of gaming and simulations to teach operations management in both worlds. I am also a clinical associate professor emeritus from the Indiana University, Kelley School of Business. But I'm currently I have a visiting appointment at the University of Virgin Islands, and I teach various business courses from my home in Pennsylvania. So that's me. And now I'll turn the program over to our facilitator, Galen Galarn.
Thank you, Linda. Hello and welcome, everyone. This promises to be a very interesting discussion. As you already know, with me are Linda Sotero and our transcriptionist, Electra Panther. We'll try to keep an eye on the chat, but if your question isn't raised or addressed, feel free to IM myself or Linda. You can discuss in text or in voice. I'll be reading the text aloud as we proceed, so you should have the voice turned on if you want to hear. Electra will transcribe the voice discussion, and she's already explained to you how she's going to indicate who was speaking. This quadrivium explores the increasing amounts and varieties of assessments that we are conducting in our classrooms. We'll try to raise our understanding of some types of these assessments and sort out the tangle in the jungle that so many types are causing in our teaching lives. Some of the topics that we'll address here include new trends or developments in assessments, a comparison of assessments in physical and virtual worlds, or physical and virtual environments, and some best practices educators have adopted that have or have not been successful in virtual classrooms. To begin, let's talk about assessments in general. How are assessments different from evaluations? And what are some new trends in assessments? So I open the floor to all of you. So how I guess those are two questions in one. How are assessments different from evaluations for those of us who maybe use them, but we don't use this terminology? And then what are some of the new trends in assessments that you are familiar with or that you've come across? Sidearm says quizzes and tests and gauntlets. Now, are these are assessments, projects. These are assessments in comparison. So, note, Gentle Heron notes that you do not use the term grading in assessments. Okay, and so assessments are different from evaluations because we don't grade assessments. Am I correct in understanding that? Star Magnus says tasks, projects. Smith says good. And then Sidearm talks about an annual performance review. Hypatia Huangande says, I grade my projects. I have a rubric I follow. And this is, I'm still understanding that we're talking about assessments. Other types of assessments are essay writing and research. That's from Star. Day Miami says, I use Uru as projects and for assessments. Oh, I remember that. Gentle says, neither needs to be a grade. So either an assessment or an evaluation can be not graded. Okay, and Spiff Whitfield says, good assessments should be able to have measures of reliability and validity. Ocean Girl says, how to compare Second Life results to real life results. Yes, we'll get to that one, those comparisons. Yes, a little bit. LV says, me too, Hypatia. I love my rubrics. Yes, me too. Sidearm says, did you meet your quota? There's an assessment. Bay Miami talks about, for example, she's go into the cleft, that's in Uru, and document as many forms of energy. I think that's forms of energy as you can find. That's an assessment. Sidearm, did you pass the state tests or our school will remain funded?
Wouldn't that be an evaluation, Sidearm?
Oh, that's a good question. Is that an assessment or an evaluation? Day Miami says, for example, oh, we already have that. Professor JR says, I used an escape room as an assessment. Oh, how interesting. And then says, I also used a rubric for projects. And yeah, Linda, you're talking about competencies. Are those assessments or evaluations? Sidearm says, Sidearm is accustomed to assessments in terms of business. Yes.
Well, so am I, but I don't necessarily use things like did you because I'm using it in classrooms. So.
Yeah. Katie Cat says, perhaps assessment gives an idea of baseline and how to proceed, while an evaluation gives an idea of what has been learned or accomplished. Oh, that's an interesting distinction. And Sidearm has a question. Oh, you're restating the questions, the difference between an evaluation and assessment. Shirkin, Change Heart, says, do you feel you were successful? And what else do you feel you need to know or tools you need to be successful? So what we're doing here is we're looking at the types of assessments that people use, that you're familiar with, and some new trends in assessments. John Paradigm says, use web pages to open in world. Okay. All right, so there's a lot of different kinds of assessments here. Linda asks if evaluations have a close the loop component. Interesting question. Okay. Okay, so that's very interesting. That's very interesting. We have all these different kinds of assessments. Let me finish up just stating some of these others for everyone who's listening, and then we're going to move on to another related topic. Sidearm here talks about an assessment as a code word like affordances, gives us trouble. Day says I create my own multiplayer virtual worlds like a colony on Mars. And Linda adds experiential exercises. Day is in Uru using a program called Extremality. All right, so let's move on just a bit because there's a lot of different kinds of assessments that we're seeing here. And there's a lot of creativity here as well in these assessments. So I'm going to paste this also in here as I ask this question. And so the question is, we're going to talk about assessments now, the physical classroom and the virtual classroom. And of course, we all know that things have really changed in the last couple of years. Given that more and more classroom work is done remotely, have assessment trends initiated change in our classrooms, or have changes in the virtualness of our classrooms initiated changes in assessments? Or is it something completely different? Have they maybe grown together? And how do you see that? What do you see in those changes? Because we've got all these assessments. Are you using them both in the physical world and in the virtual world, or just in one or the other? Okay, Saidam says, for one thing, my wife is being assessed on her Zoom classes. Well, that's interesting. And Day says the big problem with going virtual was worrying more about cheating, especially on tests. Oh, you are right there. He says I had to go to open notes tests. Yep. So there is that. We don't have as much of the eyes on paper, sort of watchfulness that we used to have. Hypatia says, I know that trying to make a group project in the online classes is difficult. And Anne says, less assessment in virtual world. Okay, so is it harder, Anne, do you think, to put assessments together, or just that there's less opportunity? Or what is it that you think causes that to be less or fewer assessments? Yeah, fairness Day. We need to be fair. And Saidam talks about open notes tests. And then Hypatia talks about Zoom proctoring during the full lockdown to try and cut down on cheating. I know a lot of companies that proctored physical tests have really had to get creative to figure out how to proctor virtual tests, or when you're taking the tests at your computer. I know when I worked for the University of Iowa that when it was brand new, to have students take their tests on their computers, and all of the things you had to do kind of to lock down their computer. Yeah, that's what Linda's talking about, proctoring online tests. Yeah, seeing if people use those. LV uses discussions in worlds and discussion groups to reflect on what was the takeaway from a lesson and the application. And here's Anne says, in the virtual world, I'm happy while my students are active. Yeah, so good to keep them busy. Jane Jetson has a question. Is anyone using XAPI or Learning Record Stores, LRS, to instrument their virtual world experiences using data and feedback loops? Gosh, those sound interesting.
Yeah.
Sidearm thinks that Zoom proctoring sounds like medical humor. Yeah. Aha. Stephen Zutfly says, I've found when teaching, the more engaging the assessment I designed, the more work it was for me to set up, train the students in Second Life stuff, and then grade. But for smaller classes, it was worth it. That is true. We sometimes have to create our own tools here in the virtual worlds, and slowly but surely they're being developed so that we have them right there for us to use. Linda mentions textbook publishers have built-in proctoring. Yes, Pearson is a textbook publisher, editing, teaching modules, all sorts of things, and they also do live and physical proctoring. So that's very, very interesting. And LV asks, we need to ask why we are proctoring tests. Find new and different ways to do assessments. Oh, that's an interesting, very, very interesting. So that you don't have to worry about the discipline aspect of it. Yeah. Anne focuses on communication, not grammar. And Day Miami has a big question. Yes, how will assessments of the 5 C's look like to measure creativity, collaboration, and communication? Let's see, the 5 C's. I see 3 of them there. What are the C's, Dave? Jane says, is anyone using machine learning for analyzing qualitative data, i.e. essays?
I do essays, but
I do
we have the resources to do machine learning too.
Yeah, that's kind of, it's still learning. The machines are still learning.
Yeah.
They really are. LV is moving more and more to ungrading practices, and I don't know that that's a bad thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you need to teach your students that it's okay to ungrade. And do they get pushback? Do the students push back? Yes, I suppose if you have to unteach them. Anne loves grammar, but she hides it by doing projects. Great, because then you make it fun, Anne. Mm-hmm. Oh, here we go. The other 2 C's are citizenship and critical thinking. So we add those to creativity, collaboration, and communication. Mm-hmm. Electra, okay. Ungrading, not having a grade. Assessments don't necessarily have to have a grade then. You can find a different way to measure what they're learning and let them demonstrate what they're learning then, it sounds like, for the assessments that you're doing. LV has mostly first or second year CC students, and they feel like I'm trying to trick them with ungrading. That's very interesting. I would think that students would just love to not be graded. That's so interesting. These are older students.
Step in with that. Mm-hmm. I have similar experience, LV, with my undergrad students, and it's because they're being pushed to get GPAs.
Oh, they need to know what those grades are because they have to report them.
They have to get good GPAs in order to get good jobs, and we've done that to them.
Yeah. Hypatia mentions that her nursing students would definitely push back because the nursing program has a ranking for entrance, you bet, to the impacted program. So yes, it's because they have to report those grades, it sounds like. The part of their culture. Yep. Professor JR says that they're using more authentic assessments in allied health. So I suppose it's one of those trends that will take a little while. The next generations of students and the next generation of admissions, because if admissions require those grades, then students will need to have them or find them somewhere because that's what they need to report. Sure, that would make sense. Anne says, I cheat my students. They never think they're doing grammar exercise. Oh, this is the hiding the grammar in the fun project. That's a great way to hide grammar. And Ellie has done the same. GPA, funds. Oh, yes. Professor JR mentions GPA equals funds. That is true also. So it's not just the students the students would probably love not to be graded. But the whole educational system, I think, is still set up to require them, and that system will need to be altered as well. And of course, we all know how hard it is to motivate the system to adjust itself. We might say, because it's a large structure and it takes a while. We almost have to go through incremental changes. Ice Guy says, one more course ungraded means fewer graded courses for GPA. Exactly. Yep, that's right. Let's see. So GPA is huge. Those assessment reports that we all have to do, students need those too. Dimensions test optional admissions might change the mindset. And Joey says yes, ungrading would be great. Students would probably love it. Okay, so yeah. LV mentions this: students find ways to cheat the system like Ann, or we find ways to cheat that system like Ann does with grammar, where we can help them get their ungraded grades, maybe. Let it be fun for them, and then we give them. How can we create their GPAs without grading each item? That's interesting too. Yeah, Linda, pass fail. I had a couple of classes where we were trying out the pass fail, and that just doesn't work for the GPA either. So much of the system is dependent upon a student's GPA. Even some jobs want to know what your GPA was. Definitely research funding for students, grants, fellowships, getting into college, internships. Yeah, they all need GPAs. Okay. So so that makes it, how does that make it more difficult, would you say, to create new assessments, this need for GPA? Or is this just something we need to be creative about while we encourage the system to adjust itself? I know you're all being very creative, but do you think it's harder to be creative with assessments, or harder to actually use the kinds of assessments that you would like to create, because there's so much need for this reporting and stats and those things? Jay has an idea. The GPA is based on grades from the teacher, and we can be creative in how we do assessments. Okay. So we're not necessarily completely locked into the item by item grade that turns into the large grade so students can calculate it themselves. I know that my students always wanted to know, they wanted to be able to tell exactly where they were with every item, particularly as we started to go online. And they wanted to, because they wanted to know what they had to do and what they could get away with not doing, I think sometimes. Yeah, so teachers have control over that. That's from Day also. And Jane mentions that there's quite a lot of resources for teachers and educators to use cloud-based machine learning and other AI tools for grading, assessments, etc. And let's see. Here's from Hypatia. As a mathematician, I was slow to understand how to use a rubric rather than right-wrong grading, and I still occasionally struggle with it. Yeah, one of the things that we're doing for on the other side of those assessments, when we are actually helping to evaluate them, is we're starting to try to use acceptable rather than correct, or not so much about right or wrong, but it's more of a holistic idea. And here Dodge mentions that we got around the grading issue at Nova by having the Second Life activity as part of a face-to-face graded class. Sure, that's great. Great idea. Elvie says again, it's tail wagging the dog. What is the purpose of education? Does it serve the learner or the system? Yeah, exactly. Inquisitive Loon said Pop's name in a hat. First 5 pulled out, get A's. Ha 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 ha. Better system than now. Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, that's really very interesting. I've got.
Can I pop in for 1 second? Jane?
Absolutely.
There she did it. She got my email. Okay. I wanted to know if Jane could put some of those tools that you were talking about that do machine learning in the local chat.
Oh, great. There they are.
Yeah, there they are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is actually the next topic because they talked about formative assessments in, let's see, did I write that down where that came up as a topic at the recent 2021 Usability Survey Focus Group in March of that year, and I guess it's coming up again soon for this year. And it was a huge topic, and Jane talks about formative assessment that can be embedded in virtual interaction using XAPI. That is a protocol out of the U.S. Department of Defense and the ADL. Funny enough, most of the higher ed academic institutions in the UK are now instrumented with XAPI, even though it started as a US protocol. So let's talk about formative assessments, because there was this idea that the discussion was heavily about formative assessments and then summative assessments. And for those, the benefit of us who are not familiar with that term, formative assessments, maybe you can help us understand better what that is and why you think it's so exciting, actually. It sounds like people are kind of excited about it, or they feel very strongly. Yes, Day, you can go to voice. They feel very strongly about it.
Okay,
Yes, please
can
do.
you guys hear me? I got the green
Yes.
dot. And I threw a question in there that Galen read, but I didn't get any response whatsoever, which is at my school, the big push is the 5 C's. Students got to be creative, collaborative, and so on. And yet we're still doing multiple choice tests. I did them. I'm not here to blame anybody, but I also played around with virtual worlds. And if you don't know what Uru is, it's a virtual game. All right, it's similar to Second Life. And one of the things I played was I created an environment where I created this virtual fossil hunt, and it had mountains and so on in it. And I broke my students into teams, and I said, one of you is going to be a leader, and I want you to go out and I want you to find as many of these fossils. And there's a time limit. This is very much real life. You guys are going to have to work together as a team, all right, and communicate with each other and collaborate with each other to find as many as you can. And it was very successful. It was a great example of a collaborative activity, not so much creative. All right, but at least they had to communicate and collaborate, and they had a map. They had to work in terms of logistics.
That's what I did.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, I did that with my ops class. Yeah, it works very well.
Imagine how much better that would have been on ScienceBase. Because
Yeah.
those of you that don't know, Galen is a teacher, she's a developer, and she's got access. What a great repertoire. All right. On ScienceBase, what we do is use something called RPCs, which not many people know about, where a student finds a fossil and everybody on the team gets that information because it's spread out over the server, very much like a local chat message, except it's given data rather than just chat. All right. So here's my question, because now we're getting into summative versus formative. Formative is what the teacher uses to evaluate a student if they're making progress within their class. Summative would be the end of course, we call them SOL tests here in Virginia that Pearson is famous for. And my question to you, Galen, is have you gone to Pearson and said, hey, look, I played around in virtual worlds. I've got the development background. Can we make, whether they're formative or summative assessments, where they focus on student collaboration and communication rather than just, the old multiple choice, because Pearson was going from just multiple choice to what they call technology enhanced items, where, you had to click and drag. It seems to be the next step would be a group-based test. I've been asking this for years, where kids are in an environment, they have to work together. Somehow they are graded on the effectiveness of their collaboration. Creativity, I don't know how we're ever going to get to that other than the teacher assessing it. So,
Yeah.
are you under NDA with Pearson? Can you tell me?
For most of it, what I can tell you is that there's interest. There's a lot of interest in establishing a presence in a virtual world for a lot of companies, educational companies, non-educational companies, just in general, and we can really thank the pandemic for that. So I've got my eyes open and my hand ready to shoot into the air and say, pick me, you know. So, and that's really all I can really say about it. But cool is all I can, that's all I can really say about that. But
I can wade in a little bit because I've experienced some things with her competitor. Not the one that starts with C, but the one that begins with M. And they've started to do some things that could be brought into virtual worlds. They just need somebody to push them into it. I currently use a simulation that they've had for many years that needs the pandemic to push it on into the virtual space.
Mm-hmm.
I've had to use it and then sort of tweak it in using it in Second Life, but I think if they got enough push, they would go in that direction. And anybody who's using them, push them, because that's where they need to be. I'm sort of out of direct teaching now. In May, I won't be teaching at all. But
yeah,
if you need somebody who knows the people that McGraw-Hill that can push them, I do not mind doing it.
Okay. I'm going to just read a couple of chat statements, so because it's kind of getting away from us here, just to get us caught up. Back when we first started talking about formative and summative, STAR, Magnet has planned a group work for a crowded classroom around 90 people. Each wrote a brief paper related to the class project. Then I wanted them to each record a live presentations of themselves, one volunteer within each group, edited their group project as a complete recording in MP3 and sent it to me. I distance teaching, none of them had cameras open during the pandemic, so this allowed them to collaborate, by turning in recordings, but also hand in a collaborative work. The presentation was 25% and 75% for individual research. That was the final project. Had this been in Second Life, it would have been a machinima project for sure. Yes, but class population had to be a manageable size. And Jane has a link there in the chat. I don't know if you've seen it. What is XAPI? And then there's a link there to XAPI. And then we have our discussion about Day's project. Yes, Day. I know one of the things when I went back to Pearson full time, one of the things that they said, tell us something about yourself. And I said, I build in virtual worlds, so let me know when you're interested. I did say that, actually.
Good for you.
So we'll see if that trickles up to whomever needs to get it. Let's see. Jane mentions Microsoft Work Trend Index. Published in March, on March 16th, notes big push into virtual worlds. Anticipated over the next year, especially millennials and Gen Z. Yes, so they're even the ones who don't think they would have too much to offer in virtual worlds are apparently interested in establishing a presence of some kind. That's very interesting. John Paradigm says cooperative learning. Groups or individuals collaborate and create a piece of a bigger, challenging project. A rubric works well here, which also can be graded. For example, build a submarine. Everyone has to create a part. Linda, yes, you mentioned voice thread also. Edith says, when I turned in a machinima in class, the professor didn't know what it was. Oh.
Come on, that professor.
Yeah. Jane talks about the Pearson CEO, the new CEO, started a workplace skills division. We want to be able to offer programs for completing lifelong learning. So we should start seeing some advancement there. Yep. And Nohi, I think it is, how you pronounce it, talks about formative assessment. It's the one used along the learning process to see how it is going on. It helps us make decisions about the activities we set for learning, if they are being effective or not. It gives the teacher a chance to add more tasks in order to help students reach their goal. Okay. Oh, even at the doctoral level. Sure. Let's see. Looking for, might have a question here in an IM. Let me see. Dee, I see your question, but I already answered that. Let's see if there's another one here. Okay. Okay. So, Dee, Miami just put a link in the chat for the Uru environment. It's mistonline.com. So look in the chat, and there it is. And now he also talks about mobile learning. Oh, yes, mobile learning and mobile viewers for virtual worlds. Dave, you mentioned ScienceSpace. I have been waiting with bated breath for ScienceSpace and the mobile viewer to be to where we've got a certain group of people that we are going to start taking into virtual worlds, but they use their phones or they use their tablets or the Chromebooks. It's just really difficult for them. They're just not tech savvy, and some of them are older and some of them are not. So, yes. Now he says my students connect to Zoom from their phones and WhatsApps. So, yes. Free software and account. Okay. Oh, in Uru, yes, in Mist Online. Jane mentions XAPI infographic with multiple resources listed, created by an instructional designer at Oklahoma State University. And there's a link there also. Sidearm gives us a piece of data about phones. 5 billion out of 8 billion people have mobile phones. Let's see. And Jane talks about formative assessment again. It says gives us the ability to provide students with targeted feedback. That's very nice. I think once we I should say this, but I'm going to. Once we eliminate the need for GPAs, we can start eliminating the need for grades, and then we can start ungrading, and then we can just put together assessments and provide to students and provide them with feedback, help them learn and make it enjoyable, because we've all learned that this idea that, student work has to be drudge work is just not true. Oh, yes, John. Lumaya. I still use Lumaya on my phone, but it hasn't been updated for a while. It was really nice there for a while when it was new. And Radagast. Now, yes, I've used Radagast as well too. But you're right, that doesn't work for phones. So developers, I'm trying to tell whatever developers, wherever I am in the virtual world, to please work on their mobile viewers so people can come in, whether they come in through the browser on their phone or they have a framework. You know, there was someone who used a framework to let us all get into Second Life through our browser. And I don't know if that's still going on. It was kind of expensive. And I know ScienceSpace also has that capacity, or they're working with a developer that has that capacity. But again, it's prohibitively expensive for a lot of people. Let's see. Dance Arena students will experience immediate success and build confidence with their own learning styles. You betcha. Because they won't have to worry so much about, you know, right now they're learning for the end product, which is that grade, because that grade goes into other pots of end products, because the real end product is the job, you know. So if learning can be part of their lifestyle without such a need for those stats, then, you know, if we separate it just a little bit from getting the job, then the getting of the job can be something that's enjoyable and maybe in a different way. Firestorm for mobile, John. I'm with you. Let's do it. Firestorm. Let's do it, Firestorm. And Day talks about virtual worlds motivate students to do better on assessments. Yeah. Bring them in. Let them see what is different. Let's see, we have about 10 minutes left. So the last thing I want to put to you, and you're kind of talking about it already, so I just want to focus these last few minutes about this question. You know, there's a heightened interest in assessments in general. And for some of us, it's the desire to help our students learn in a different way, whether it has to be graded or we can ungrade it. And then there's maybe there's some motivation that is external to us. And so what do you think some of the reason is for the heightened interest in assessments in general? There just seems to be more push to do more assessments, graded or ungraded, and give feedback and reports and how students are doing in general. And I'm just curious for all of you educators out there who are, you know, in virtual worlds and you're in the classroom and you're on Zoom. Is this just something you're interested in, or is there motivation from outside of you, or is there new requirements or something like that? What would you say about that?
I think Sidearm touched on it a little bit. You want to elaborate on that, Sidearm?
And while we're waiting, LV is inviting us all to the 2022 usability survey. It's on Thursday, the 7th of April.
That's a good place to bring up the mobile viewer.
And Professor JR talks about accreditation standards are demanding more. Yes. Ocean Girl, corporate C-levels don't want to spend money until they are sure it will provide return on investments. So that's what the assessments do then, I take it. Hypatia talks about seen stress on assessment my whole career since the late 80s. Started with the basic skills testing pushed by H. Ross Perot in Texas. Really, that's really interesting.
That's true.
Sorry, I can't hear you. I'm watching for your chat text. And Carla Kincaid says, I wish I could say the push for more assessments was as a way to use them for learning advancement, but I really think it's mostly to find ways to evaluate quality teaching and learning in the simplest possible way. That's interesting. So it sounds like there's some pressure for assessments that are a little bit, that are external to educators as well. Can I just take a quick survey? Oh, here's, I'll take my quick survey in just a second. D. Miami says, the last state test I gave was very stressful. Oh no, students who were virtual were required to come back to school for the state tests and were worried about getting COVID during their state tests. Oh, yeah, I bet that was really hard on them. Yeah. I think students, young people are very much aware of things like that. Mm-hmm. Oh, John says that we can put code into Firestorm so it will run a live video like Zoom. Yes, okay. Jane gives us a resource, U.S. Future of Testing and Education, Artificial Intelligence, September 2021, and there's a link there to some information. So, as we are wrapping up today, we have about 5 minutes, I would just like to ask you all, you can just put it in one word, or a few words if you want to, but when you think about assessments, and it looks like we're all doing assessments or creating assessments or evaluating assessments, so we're all on one side or the other, but if you did not have to do assessments, let's assume that you have to do at least one as a teacher, but if you did not have to, would you create some kind of assessment for your students, graded or ungraded, if you didn't have to do it? Do you think it's something that's valuable on its own? And I'm not saying to do a lot of them. I'm saying, would you do them at all? Would you create them at all for your students? Yes, you would create them. Yes, you would create them. Yes, you would create them. I see lots of yeses. Oh, that's exciting. I thought perhaps, assessments were one of those things that, it's like getting a root canal. Some people would, yes, but they would look different. Oh, this is neat. Because this is you as teachers being creative. Would reframe it to feedback instead of grading. They can give guideposts for how well students are doing. Create a practice test for the Agile certification I'm training them for, but not tests. Some people are saying no, they wouldn't do it. Yes, they would do it. There is some accountability that is needed. But it would be something a little bit different, and you'd have perhaps a little bit more freedom to create it the way that you want to, so your students would learn those things that you want them to learn. This is what it sounds like we're getting from all this feedback. He says there were courses in which I would create my own program. I created formative assessments with opportunities for students to improve their product. Katie says if your tooth is too damaged, a root canal is necessary. So some assessment perhaps you'd have to create. Hypatia says I wanted to be able to give feedback on competency. Linda also measures competency, but not evaluate using a grade. Less of a test, here's Antibody, less of a test and more of a conversation or a game or role play situation. So you could be more creative with it, it sounds like. This is great. No to formal testing, yes to formative and informal. Okay. Jane gives us another link for a resource, Brookings Institute, How Teachers Can Learn from Artificial Intelligence, including AI, in assessments as well as other use cases. Okay, and then it says, see if they're learning in a project. Okay, and on that note, it looks like if there's anything more you would like to say, go ahead and put it in the chat about assessments in general, because we are collecting this information for our Quadrivium report that comes out in the journal. And I would like to thank all of you for being here. This was a wonderful session. It looks like you've enjoyed it. All of you are passionate about teaching, passionate about education in general. And I'm finding that, granted, you know, there's companies out there that are, some of them are in it for the money, but really you can't understand education without educators. So whatever side of the desk they're on, whatever side of the assessment they're on, they really have to understand students and student learning, and that it's very rewarding all the way around. So again, thank you all. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Electra. And we'll see you all at the next session.
My pleasure. Thank you, Galen. Excellent, excellent facilitating.
Oh, thank you.
Done good. Thanks, everybody. It was really good. I learned a lot, as always.